Right now, you are drowning in information you will never fully understand. The device in your hand runs on physics you couldn't explain. The medicine in your cabinet was discovered through chemistry you've never studied. The roads you drive on were engineered by people whose entire field of knowledge you've never once opened a book about. And that's fine. That's normal. That's just Tuesday in the modern world. But there was a moment in history when that was not true, when one human mind could hold all of it. Not most of it, not an impressive chunk of it, all of it. Every field, every discipline, every significant thing the human species had figured out about the world up to that point. One person, one brain, everything. And then that became impossible. Not because humans got stupider, because knowledge itself crossed a threshold that no single mind could ever cross again. The moment it happened, it changed what intelligence means, what education is for, and quietly, what we lost when we stopped being able to know everything. The people who lived on the other side of that line had a name. They were called polymaths, but that word doesn't capture what they actually were. A polymath today means someone good at several things. A Renaissance man, broadly curious. We use it as a compliment at dinner parties. That is not what the original polymaths were. They were something structurally different from anything that exists today, and the last of them knew, while they were still alive, that they were the last. Start with Aristotle, because Aristotle is where the story actually begins. He was born in 384 BC in northern Greece, and by the time he died, he had written on logic, biology, physics, poetry, politics, ethics, astronomy, rhetoric, dreams, memory, meteorology, and the nature of the soul. Not as a hobbyist, as the leading authority on every single one of those subjects. His work on biology wouldn't be meaningfully surpassed for nearly 2,000 years. His logical framework defined how educated people in Europe and the Islamic world reasoned about everything until the 1600s. One human being built the intellectual infrastructure of Western civilization almost from scratch, across a dozen fields simultaneously, and got most of it right. That sounds impossible now. It wasn't then. In 384 BC, the total amount of recorded human knowledge fit inside a room. A good reader with enough time could genuinely get through most of it. The Library of Alexandria, often described as the greatest repository of ancient knowledge, held an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls at its peak. That sounds enormous, but most of those were copies of the same texts, administrative records, and works that have since been judged as minor. The actual body of serious human knowledge was small enough that a dedicated mind could absorb most of it in a lifetime. And so, people did. Ibn al-Haytham, in the 11th century, wrote the foundational text of modern optics, developed the scientific method as we now practice it, and also worked seriously in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine. Al-Biruni, his contemporary, wrote on geology, anthropology, comparative religion, pharmacology, and physics, and made a calculation of the Earth's radius accurate to within 1%, using a hill, a protractor, and his own brain. Then came Leonardo, and Leonardo is where most people think the story peaks. And they're right, but not for the reason they think. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks show a mind operating across painting, sculpture, anatomy, engineering, hydrology, geology, optics, botany, cartography, and early aerodynamics. Not dabbling, working on his anatomical drawings done by dissecting human corpses in secret was so accurate that surgeons were still using them as a reference 400 years later. His engineering designs for water systems and military machines were centuries ahead of what could actually be built. He was not a genius who was curious about many things. He was a genius who refused to accept that any field was someone else's territory. But here's the thing nobody says about Leonardo. He was already slightly behind. By the time he died in 1519, the printing press had been operating for about 60 years, and those 60 years had done something that could not be undone. Knowledge was multiplying faster than any one person could read it. The last person with a serious claim to knowing everything was Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He died in 1716. He co-invented calculus independently of Newton. He built one of the first mechanical calculators. He made foundational contributions to logic, metaphysics, physics, geology, linguistics, and political theory. His philosophical framework was sophisticated enough that it took 2 more centuries for thinkers to fully work through what he had started. And even Leibniz, in his own letters, described feeling the ground shifting beneath him. He wrote about the terror of a growing literature that no single person could track anymore. He could feel the edge of what was possible for one mind, and he was standing right at it. After Leibniz, the polymaths didn't disappear immediately. In the early 1800s, Thomas Young contributed to Egyptology, wave optics, linguistics, and medicine. Alexander von Humboldt spent decades assembling a unified theory of the natural world that touched on meteorology, oceanography, ecology, and geography. But both of them described themselves as synthesizers, people pulling together what others had found, not generating foundational new knowledge across every field they touched. The role had quietly changed. The last of the universal minds were becoming the first of a new thing. Very smart people doing their best to hold an increasingly large library together. By 1850, it was over. The fields had split. Chemistry and physics had become different kingdoms. Biology had fractured into botany, zoology, anatomy, and physiology. History has been divided into specializations. Engineering had branched into disciplines that barely shared a vocabulary. A person who mastered organic chemistry knew almost nothing about inorganic chemistry. A physicist working on thermodynamics might have no meaningful grasp of electromagnetism. The map had gotten too big for any single traveler to walk all of it. And here is the part that sits quietly underneath all of this. We do not have a word for what was lost. We have words for knowing a lot about one thing. We have words for knowing a little about many things. We do not have a word for the specific cognitive experience of a mind that genuinely holds all of human knowledge at once. Because no living human has ever had it, and none alive today ever will. What did it feel like? Leibniz gave the closest answer we have. He described the experience of sitting with a new problem and feeling the entire body of human knowledge available to him as a kind of landscape he could walk through. When he needed a tool, he reached for it across disciplines, the way you reach across a table for something you can see. Everything was visible. Everything was adjacent. There were no walls between fields yet, because the fields themselves had not yet been invented. That experience does not exist for anyone. Today, the most educated humans alive have deep vertical knowledge in 1 or 2 narrow corridors and dim awareness of everything outside them. That's not a criticism. It's the only possible response to a body of knowledge that now doubles roughly every 12 years. But something was lost when the last mind that could see all of it went dark. Not just knowledge, a way of thinking. The polymath didn't just know many things. They built connections across fields that specialists couldn't see, because specialists couldn't see the other field at all. The most important ideas in human history, evolution, information theory, germ theory, the structure of the universe, almost always arrived when someone looked at one field with tools borrowed from another. That cross-field vision required a mind capable of holding both fields simultaneously. We have been improvising replacements for that ever since. The answer we came up with is collaboration, teams, institutions, peer review networks that let specialists talk to each other slowly across disciplinary walls. It mostly works. The science still advances. The knowledge still compounds. But Leibniz could do it alone, standing at a desk in an afternoon. And after 1716, no one ever would again. You will never know everything. That is not a failure of ambition. The wall is real. The last human who stood on the other side of it died over 300 years ago, and the wall has been moving further away every decade since. What we call intelligence now, the sharp vertical expertise, the narrow mastery, is the adaptation we evolved to survive on this side of that threshold. We didn't get stupider. The world just finally got bigger than us.